Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third episode of the Romans Movie Review Podcast. I can finally say I have a trilogy attached to my name. Thank you for listening. If you have been so far, you can find the first episode with Jordan Alford on SoundCloud, and then you can find the second episode with Matthew and the rest of my episodes to come on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, Romans Movie Reviews. Before we get into anything else, and before I go off on a crazy tangent, I'm here to introduce my third guest, Devaughn Taylor. Devaughn, how's it going, man?
What up? I'm doing fantastic. I got me some coffee and a McDonald's breakfast burrito. I'm ready to go.
Wow, I'm not a coffee person, but breakfast burritos are the best thing in the world. I had some hard-boiled eggs for breakfast because eggs are amazing. Put a little salt on there, a little bit of pepper. Bon appetit.
I work at two breakfast joints, so I kind of live off of breakfast. It's kind of much.
Breakfast is really the best meal of the day because you've just got like a variety of different foods. I mean, you do with lunch and dinner as well, but there's just so many different types of flavors you can digest. And honestly, breakfast is the best, man. I don't eat it enough, but when I do, I'm like, breakfast is the best.
Hear that.
So how was Easter, man? How was what'd you do this past weekend? You see family? Did you watch some movies?
Ooh, I worked quite a bit, and then I had a friend in from out of town, which was nice getting to hang out with her. So just kind of hung out when we watched about 3/4 of Queer Eye, like the entire season. Like we just went hard into it, and then we watched a couple movies too. We did a little double of The Greatest Showman, which was my first time, and that's a very weird movie. And then we watched The Disaster Artist. So I had a pretty solid Easter, actually.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I didn't do too much. I mean, I work at a retail store, so it was super busy leading up to Easter Sunday. And then on Sunday, I kind of just relaxed because I'd been on my feet for so long. I think I walked like about 10 to 15 miles in like 2 days, and just having to constantly talk to guests at the same time. I mean, it just got so overwhelming. So Sunday, I kind of just relaxed and just played video games, watched Akira for the first time.
Yeah, I saw you were disappointed.
Yeah, I might get into that a little bit later, but so I went to bed a little upset because I was really excited for that one. Well, this week we're recording on a Tuesday, but you're going to be listening to this on a Thursday or any day after. So there's not really many news topics, but Devaughn is a horror junkie. He loves horror films. Every type of horror film you could find, he might have seen it, and he loves a lot of films in that genre for good reasons. It's a pretty good genre. So this week we're just kind of going to focus on talking about horror films because A Quiet Place comes out on Thursday, which looks absolutely amazing. It's getting stunning reviews. Jim from The Office and Emily Blunt star, and I'm really, really excited to finally get my eyes and ears onto that film, even though I'm not too big on horror films. So it's going to be nice to get some interesting contrast here with me not being so big into horror films and you being the big horror fan here today. So the first topic is, what was the first horror film that you loved?
Oh man, so yeah, like I'm a horror junkie. I have been for a very long time. Like I had those twisted family members that showed me horror movies at a very early age, as one should do. And so one of the very first horror movies, and I mean it's a little cliche, but at the same time it just makes the most sense, which was A Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it's almost the perfect like entry level horror movie for like either somebody that's not into horror or somebody who hasn't seen a lot of it, or for someone like me. I watched it for the first time when I was 7, and so I was very young. Wow. And I mean, I remember we watched it like during the daytime with like the blinds open, and I was still just like scared out of my mind. Like, but at the same time, it was like so fascinating, and and the idea of like not being able to get away from something that's in your sleep, like that was a super scary concept. Yeah. But at the same time, Nightmare on Elm Street's a lot of fun though too. It has some really good camp moments in it. Freddy Krueger is so entertaining, even though he's not in the first one all that much, but he's super entertaining. And then, I got to the end of the movie and then I was like, wait, there's 6 more of these. I can keep watching them. And then, it just kind of started from there. So I would definitely say A Nightmare on Elm Street, and it just holds up incredibly well, like to this day.
Yeah, I watched A Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time just late last year in anticipation for Blade Runner 2049. Because when I was writing for Geeks and Gamers, I was doing an 80s article, which ended up not being my best work to date. But I watched it just to kind of get some more vibes from from the 80s, excuse me. And it really is a pretty good film. I don't love it quite on the level as you do, but I think I'm due for a rewatch, and I really want it on Blu-ray as well because I feel like some of the visuals, there's sort of like the surreal, dreamlike state for obvious reasons. And as someone who loves sleeping, I cherish every second I can get. That movie honestly kind of creeped me out a bit because nothing is worse than having those dreams where you just can't wake up from it and you feel like you're dying and you can't escape. And then when you wake up, you just breathe a sigh of relief, and that's kind of what A Nightmare on Elm Street feels like. And for you to see that at 7, my goodness, how did you sleep? How are you alive to this day? I mean, do you not have exhaustion from sleep? I mean, it just
Like I said, I think starting off early though got me like so desensitized. So like it was a good start. Like I said, like it's
yeah.
like kind of the perfect amount of horror to start with because it's not like
Yeah.
overly scary though either, but it is just like you said, like especially for a primetime napper like you, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Cuz for me, I couldn't when growing up, I really wasn't allowed to watch too much. The first R-rated film I saw by myself was The Wolf of Wall Street, and I was always too scared as a kid because my grandpa had basically traumatized me because my first look into like some true horror was those like pop-up videos, those jump scare videos. Those things are terrifying, and I saw those around like that age, 5, 6, or 7, and so that traumatized me as a kid, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do it, man. And so since then, I'm coming around to it more and more. I'm seeing Unsane later today, which isn't technically a horror film, but I'm seeing that, and then A Quiet Place. So I'm really getting excited for more horror films as I grow up a little bit and get out of the diapers. But the first horror film I loved was probably John Carpenter's The Thing. Again, I watched that a couple years ago, recently, and it's just a movie that sort of turned me on to horror films and really started making me appreciate horror films on a deeper level. I had seen It Follows and The Babadook previously before that, but I didn't quite enjoy them until I saw The Thing because The Thing really turned me on to this psychological horror aspect that I never really noticed in these films, and it was something that I kind of truly desire now in horror films because to me there's two types of horror films, and we're probably going to get into this into the second topic here, but there's two types of horror films. There's the horror films that simply exist just to have stupid jump scares and to have the cat jump in front of the camera, and then all of a sudden the music goes quiet, but then there's the scary face. But then there's the horror films that really get under my skin with films like The Babadook, It Follows, The Thing, Halloween even. Halloween is just, to me, I've seen that film multiple times now within the last year, and it still to this day doesn't really have jump scares, but it just has this really great psychological horror, and it's the perfect blend of the two. And The Thing to me is the perfect culmination of not only does it have great characters, it has a great monster, great themes, and a really great atmosphere that I truly love being in. I know love sounds like a strong word here, but I love being in that space because I feel so confined, cold, and lost. And The Thing is just so tremendous because of that.
Exactly. Like that's why horror is so great because like you can have like the full experience with it. Like it's not even like sometimes you do just you're watching it for the story, but also like people like you said you feel weird about saying that you love being in that place, but at the same time it's like I like that's what you go into it for. You're like, oh, I want to like go into this movie with my adrenaline going. And Carpenter is one of my favorite horror directors. The Fly is another big one of my favorite horror films, one of the first ones that I saw whenever I was younger as well, because Carpenter he did the body horror so well, but he also, especially now I appreciate Carpenter even more with everybody being so nostalgic lately and everything being kind of in this 80s theme, and who embodied the 80s horror like Carpenter did. I mean, he kind of owned the 80s in terms of horror, so good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And and that's the thing is I really just appreciate when these movies can sort of just get you on just a deeper level, because nothing is more terrifying than psychological horror to me. I mean, I like acting scared or like having this like actual verb of being scared, like jumping back or like covering my face or stuff like that, or cringing or something. But like the actual just emotion of just sitting in a theater and just like wondering like where you are, who you are, how you're feeling, like you're just kind of thrown across the room. And movies like It Comes at Night did that really well last year, and Babadook and It Follows I've mentioned multiple times. But yeah, man, The Thing is right up there, and John Carpenter that's why he's the GOAT of horror. He's the best. So like I said, it's kind of going to go into our second topic here, but for you, I've already kind of put my stance on this. What are the best and worst types of horror films? Now, you've seen so many more horror films than I have, so I really want you to get into like the nitty gritty. What are some obscure films that are a part of both, are a part of best or worst? Just really dive into it, man.
Okay, so like me and Matthew kind of got into it, and we because I was on his podcast also talking horror, and horror has probably some of the most probably the most subgenres out of any genre, and it's very versatile, and there's so many things. So that's kind of the way I approach it when people ask me like what's my favorite type of horror movie, I suppose. I do like, from what I hear from you, you kind of lean more like, psychological thriller territory, psychological horror, which I'm more of a visual person. I'm more of a pure horror kind of guy. Like I love blood. I love violence. I love, I love mayhem in my horror movies. So I'm kind of more of a horror purist, I suppose. But as far as like some of my favorite subgenres, I do love me a good possession film. I think if done right, possession film has a very great framework for you to work with and tell different interesting stories. Exorcism of Emily Rose is like a possession movie / court procedural. Like I thought that's a super interesting one. Obviously, The Exorcist itself, The Conjuring could even count as a possession movie as well. So I definitely like me some good possession movies. But over the years, the past couple of years, as I've been like kind of refining like my horror taste, because I'd already kind of gotten the broad horror. So now it's been me kind of exploring more, independent horror and things like that. So I really do enjoy me like, I don't know how to describe it, but I guess like very highly stylized horror. Like I do enjoy that, we get horror movies now that, put emphasis on cinematography again and on creating atmosphere and a good score, or, telling these very interesting stories, such as It Follows, which was kind of something that like got me, like I was always a horror junkie, but then It Follows like kind of put me like
Over
created the
edge.
obsession, like.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to seek out films like that where it had this like cool music and these cool, interesting vibes to it. So I definitely have been leaning a lot more independent horror lately. So like one of my favorites, you said you want some a little bit more obscure. One of my favorite horror movies that's currently on Netflix, so everybody can check it out. I recommend this movie to someone at least once a week, I swear. But it is the movie is called Starry Eyes. It came out in 2014, I believe. And Starry Eyes, it's kind of a similar movie to The Neon Demon, if people are fans of Neon Demon.
Love a Neon Demon.
I love whenever horror movies like incorporate Hollywood and fame into it, because I think that's a very interesting horror concept. But basically, Starry Eyes is you follow this actress. She's doing the waitress actress thing, and she's trying to balance it out, and she's not really having much luck. She goes to this audition, and things get really, really weird. And it kind of goes from there. I won't reveal it too much, but basically she auditions for this movie that is being produced by a cult, essentially. And basically they tell her, if you give in to this cult, you will get all the fame and everything you want, blah, 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 but you got to do these things. And some bad things happen to her, and then she does some really bad things to other people. So it's a very interesting film about what are you really willing to do to get the things you want. But it has some great body horror to it. It has this kind of the same as It Follows, like you feel like it takes place in the past, but it's in the present, so it kind of has like that timelessness aspect to it. has this incredible score, and the practical effects for the body horror are just absolutely amazing, and some really great performances too. And especially if you are somebody familiar with like LA and the movie scene, you'll kind of watch this movie and like see the people in this and be like, oh my god, that's so true. So Starry Eyes is an incredible movie, so if you want something a little bit different, a little bit weird, something you haven't really seen before, I would definitely check that out, and it is on Netflix.
Nice, nice. That is an awesome, seems like an awesome choice because not only is it super accessible to everybody, because everybody has Netflix at this point, even if someone else is paying for it, but maybe I'll find time to catch that with someone to watch it with. Maybe my girlfriend, maybe my brother, if we have the chance. But yeah, I really just like how you went into talking about how like movies like The Exorcist sort of have this like blend of like this really nice like atmospheric horror and body horror. Because for one, I started The Exorcist recently. I never got a chance to finish it because I kind of wanted to just throw on something before work, just kind of pass by time, and I was getting creeped out just at like the opening credits, just like kind of just going through this. Where's it first started? I think it's like somewhere in the Middle East, and we go into like this cave,
Yep.
and I just get like super freaked out, and I was like, I couldn't imagine trying to sit through that movie late at night. I'd have to watch it with the lights on because a lot of people say that is like the quintessential best horror film, obviously to some people. But so movies like The Conjuring, for me, because you kind of mentioned possession films for a little bit too, I haven't seen either of them, and my brother and my family absolutely love them. I feel like they're possessed sometimes when they talk about The Conjuring. They're like, you have to see it. I know you'll appreciate it. You'll love it. And they kind of describe the camera work and how James Wan sort of moves the camera throughout the hallways and turns into doorways and corners. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. And I would love it, but
They
I
are
would not be able to
super cool.
I would not be able to sit through that at all because to me, like, I live in a house. I don't want to be scared of my house. Like, it's just not something that I need to happen because, again, I cherish that sleep so much. But maybe one day I'll get around to them. But, Conjuring to me seems like one of those movies that seems like they'd be the perfect blend for me, where it's got some pretty decent jump scares, but it's got really great psychological horror. And those are the two films I want to see, but I can't bring myself to do it.
Man,
I'm going to be scared.
You definitely need to watch them. Like, they are exactly like what you want, like like you said, kind of this perfect blend of like jump scare horror and like and it's almost like a blend of a mainstream horror and an indie horror too, because like James Wan does some really cool stuff, and knowing you and how much you appreciate technical stuff, especially The Conjuring 2 has some of the most like inventive scares I've seen like in years, and it's pretty cool. So I definitely recommend checking them out.
Yeah, maybe one day. I'm gonna have to give myself some time because I
gotta
get
hype yourself
chills.
up.
yeah, I get like chills just thinking about like the camera work and all that, the way that my family describes it. But yeah, man, horror is a really just interesting genre. Because one thing I want to touch on before we move into the third topic, you mentioned how like horror can kind of have a lot of the most subgenres in it, because there's a movie like Better Watch Out that came out recently that's horror, but it's also like comedic, and it's also kind of like self-aware, and it's kind of supposed to be riffing on itself. And there's so many different. The Babysitter, one of them, also that came out last year, horror, but it's also self-aware and kind of silly, but intentionally. And I think that horror to me is, again, like when horror is perfect and it's nailed, I would contend it's probably the best genre. That's why when it blends with a movie like Alien, which we're going to get into shortly, that's why I would consider it probably one of the best films ever made, because it's got like science fiction and horror combined, two genres that I feel when they're nailed on both ends, you create one of the most spectacular films ever made. So
Yeah, it's kind of like somebody asked in the group the other day, what was the hardest genre to pull off, and comedy and horror were up there as two of the hardest ones to nail. And like you said, like whenever you do nail it, and like we're starting to see it, even now, horror movies, genre movies are starting to get awards now and stuff too.
Yeah.
Like once
crazy.
you really nail them down, something special can happen.
All right, well, let's go ahead and go on into the third topic here. We're going to get into some personal horror movie questions. First question of the few that I'm going to ask: what is your favorite terrifying monster, creature, person in a horror film? So not like a character, but like the antagonist, I guess. So like the xenomorph in Alien would be an example. What is your favorite
Well,
monster, creature, or person.
yeah. So whenever I saw your notes, I picked one. I picked a creature and a person.
Okay.
So, but the creature is actually a very recent one, and you're gonna have fun with me when we talk about this. 'Cause I remember whenever I originally brought this up. As you know, I love the movie Life like a lot.
Yeah.
I love that movie. And I think Calvin is one of the coolest movie monsters that we've had in like a very long time. And like from the design of it, I thought the CGI was really really good. It was really convincing.
Mm-hmm.
But not only that, Calvin had his own theme music, and he was just like virtually unstoppable. And I really appreciate like it sounds weird, like whenever I watch a horror movie I know it's gonna have a bad ending. Like I kind of like at this point I'm rooting for the monster. I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, nobody's making out of this movie alive, and I'm super happy about that because like somebody always ends up making it out of the film. And I'm like, no, Calvin is taking no prisoners. He was so savage.
Yeah.
And they did it to themselves. And it's like one of those things, Calvin was a normal alien little thing, and then they pissed him off, and then he just said, well, oh well, you guys are all dead to me now. And I loved it. Like I had so much, I love that movie a lot. And
Yeah.
then, as far as character, another movie you're probably aware that I'm a big fan of is American Psycho.
Oh, so
American Psycho is my second favorite movie just in general all the time, but by proxy, it's my favorite horror movie. Patrick Bateman is he's an incredible character. Like whenever I had seen the movie for the first time, and even though I didn't understand it whenever I was younger, but then just watching Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman, like my eyes are just so glued to the
good.
screen. Like he's so magnetic and he's so perfect and he's wickedly dark, and just everything about it is just like I love that movie in general. But like Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman is like probably my favorite. Like if I have to name my favorite like single performance in a film, it would be like his performance as Patrick Bateman, because he just really embodied everything about it. Like just the quotability of the movie as well. I mean,
Oh yeah.
like he's just fantastic. And they also, it's like one of the few movies that like kind of elevated the book as well, because like his portrayal is a very different than the book version of Patrick Bateman, but they did it in such a clever way with Christian Bale being like so good looking and suave, but then just everything they did with that character. So I mean, and Patrick Bateman, he could literally be anybody. He could be your neighbor for all you know. It's one of those
Coworker,
situations
yeah.
that makes it that much scarier. So Patrick Bateman is he's all-time classic.
Yeah, two very different types of movies, and two movies I really like, actually. I thought Life was actually better than Alien Covenant last year, because Alien Covenant to me is a totally different story, and I'd have to designate an entire podcast of talking about that one. But Life, to me, Calvin's, specifically, I would completely agree that creature design is one of the coolest, most unique, most inspired, creative or designs I've ever seen. I thought it was really unique because it wasn't like this tall monolith type figure with limbs, reaching out and just being like the cliche type of alien that we know. But it was smaller, could get into tight spaces and just really
grew
wreck
and
shop.
evolved and like
Yeah,
took different forms, and so cool.
Yeah, it was so interesting, and I love kind of what they did with that character, or not even a character, sorry, with the monster in that movie. Just so unique and so cool. I wish we would see more movies like that, because I feel like a lot of aliens in movies today, they all look generally the same. And I thought that was really a nice breath of fresh air. The ending of that movie, though, still pisses me off. But no, still a pretty solid movie and a really great creature design nonetheless. And then Patrick Bateman, too, he is just terrifying. I saw that film recently as well, and I still cannot get some of Christian Bale's facial expressions out of my head. I mean, some of it's just truly terrifying. The way the camera zooms in on his face and he's sweating looking at the business cards. I mean, it is just one of the most dynamite movies I've ever seen. And Christian Bale, as much as I love The Dark Knight and as much as I love him in many other movies, that is probably his best performance and one of the best performances I've ever seen. It's truly maniacal, about on the same level as Jake Gyllenhaal in Nightcrawler. So yeah, two great answers. Just to kind of keep it short, my favorite monster, Xenomorph. I mean, it's just it's a basic bitch answer. That's the type of person I am. But
But
it's
hey, I mean,
it's
you
the
can't argue
xenomorph man.
classics, though. I
Yeah,
mean, like, for
exactly.
real. Like,
Yeah. And then Michael Myers, another good one. Not too big on Jason. Freddy Krueger's pretty good too, but I've only seen the first Nightmare on Elm Street. So those are just my short answers there, but great answers from you. What is your favorite character in a horror film? So your protagonist or an ancillary character or a secondary character. Which character is your favorite in a horror film?
so this is kind of like a new pick, and like, so I had an interesting thing happen this year. Like, whenever I was watching horror movies in Halloween around Halloween season, and I revisited a movie that like I remembered enjoying as a kid, and then I hadn't seen it for like a long time. I was like, I wonder how much I'm still gonna enjoy this. And when I rewatched Candyman, like my mind is was so blown by this movie,
Yeah.
and I'm like shocked that like it's not talked about more. Candyman is amazing for many reasons. Another great, antagonist to another great slasher in Candyman. Tony Todd's amazing. But one thing that really stands out in Candyman is the protagonist Helen, portrayed by Virginia Madsen. She's a very good final girl. Like she's researching the story for her thesis, and she's investigating this myth, but then also what's going on like in real downtown like ghetto Chicago. And then eventually she starts going crazy, and like something that's like interesting is like they're trying to make the protagonist look like the antagonist. They like make it look like she's like killing people, and then so she goes crazy, and then she has this just beautiful moment at the end of the film. It's so triumphant the way that she defeats Candyman, and she sacrifices herself. But what's interesting is Helen is actually kind of tempted throughout the movie. Like, she is like allured to Candyman, and she's like almost like swayed to his side to like follow him and like be with him or whatever. So it's like, it's really interesting when you see somebody that's like, when you see your protagonist like almost like, slip up and like, go to that side. So I think she's a very underrated final girl. So if you guys haven't seen Candyman lately, you should rewatch it.
Nice. Yeah, Candyman is a movie that I heard about when I was really young because my dad said when he was younger that he was absolutely terrified of that movie and he couldn't sleep because of it. And so that's why I've always kind of remembered it because, obviously, like I look up to my dad like, oh, he's this big monster. My dad is not a monster, sorry. He's just this big guy, that, isn't scared of anything. And then I find out that he basically cries himself to sleep as a kid because of Candyman. But my answer for favorite character in a horror film is I don't know her name off the top of my head because I'm not too familiar with the characters' names in A Nightmare on Elm Street, but the main girl in that one, what's her name? Because she's really good.
Oh man, now you got me blanking. But she is also, she is also a fantastic final girl.
She's one that I just thought was so incredibly well done because you really could feel like she was losing and lacking like sleep, and she was just really sort of like devolving into this person that was not going insane, but all the characters in that world think she's
Nancy,
going crazy.
there it is.
Nancy,
Sorry,
there we go.
Nancy.
So basic, I feel like that's always a character's name in a horror film. But she was really powerful and she really just got the job done for me, man. And I just thought that her in that movie alongside, like a Ripley and Alien, of course, were, they just got these strong female characters, or final girl, as you put them. I'm sure that's what you guys use in your little horror groups that you chat with.
That is the lingo.
So, she's just a really great final girl, and just really, it's just a really well-rounded character, man. I just really like sort of when these movies can just really take characters, because like I'm sure that you saw Strangers Pray at Night, right?
Yes.
And I heard that characters in that are just horrible and just dumb and stupid, like
It's
most
absolutely
mainstream
awful.
yeah, like mainstream horror films. So, again, like I'm not too well versed in horror films, but it's just really nice to see when we go into horror films and you just can kind of tell that this is just a well-rounded character that really just drives the narrative and that you're really invested in and care about. So she would definitely be up there alongside like a Ripley for me as my top two. So last question before we start moving into our final bits of the day. What is one scene in a horror film that figuratively made you shit your pants?
All right. I mentioned this movie earlier, and this was another one that I watched when I was super young. But The Fly, John Carpenter's The Fly remake. It's amazing. Like everybody, like as all of Carpenter's films has these amazing practical effects. But
Hmm.
I remember the scene where he's in the bar and he's arm wrestling a guy, and then they're arm wrestling, and then he just pushes his arm forward and snaps the guy's forearm like in half,
Oh
and it
yeah.
like pokes out the skin. And oh my gosh, I remember the first time I saw that as a kid, like I just lost my mind. But at the same time, it was like one of those weird things. I was like, can you rewind that so we can see that again? Because that was really gross and cool.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a super weird thing, but like oh man, I remember like the first time I was watching that movie I saw as a kid, and, like didn't see it coming at all. I was like,
Hmm.
what's gonna happen? And it was just and the effects just are
Yeah,
so
of
great
course.
on it, and like still hold up super well. So that's one that just like really got me as a kid.
Yeah.
Oh man, like it's a gross one.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure you mean David Cronenberg, right? Not
Oh
John
my
Carpenter.
god, I did say Carpenters. Oh my
Yeah.
god,
No, it's
Cronenberg.
fine. Yeah. When we mention Carpenter multiple times, we just it just gets ingrained in our head. But
E-
yeah, David Cronenberg.
Every horror fan just like clicked out of this episode now. They're like, you have a horror guy that just said The Fly was Carpenter. They'll like, get this guy out of here. I just lost my card.
Yeah.
Nobody can hear this now.
All right. Well, maybe I can edit it out or readjust your voice or something. But no, it's a good moment.
Just
That's a good
re-edit
moment.
your voice over it. It's just
Yeah.
like
John
Cronenberg.
Carpenter. Or I even just said John Carpenter. David Cronenberg. Okay, for sure. The Fly, man. Yeah, it has really great body horror. Like I remember the first time you just see the full form of the fly, and you're just like, ugh, it's so
Oh, the
gross. Like,
Brundle fly is
yeah,
gross.
yeah, it's just so gross. But man, what a great film. And then for me, Mulholland Drive, first of all, one of the weirdest films I've ever seen. It just makes me so uneasy thinking about it. I always say this phrase, but I wanted to seep into the seams of my couch and never come out again. That's the way the movie felt, made me feel. But there's a moment in that film, again, the movie is very ambiguous, but there's a character, he looks really nervous at this bar. And he's really concerned, and this guy comes up to him and talks to him about going somewhere, and he goes around the corner, and like there's this thing, it looks like a dumpster man or like a garbage guy or some, it's not a hobo, but it just looks so deformed and so gross. And the way that it's executed, it isn't like a typical like in your face jump scare, but just the way the camera moves and the way David Lynch makes you feel uncomfortable leading up to that moment. I figuratively, and I think almost literally, maybe like a turtle was peeking out or something, man, but I legit I freaked out, bro. I couldn't breathe. I felt gross. I just, it was honestly truly terrifying. And have you seen Mulholland Drive?
I have
I don't.
not.
Oh, dude, you
I,
mentioned Starry Eyes, and I was thinking of Mulholland Drive the whole time, and I was waiting for you to name drop it.
it's
But I
one of
mean,
those movies that like people like tell me to watch every day, and I like just for I think what it is, it's a long movie and that's hard to plan for.
yeah,
So I can never
yeah, that's
plan the
true.
time to watch it, but like it's like people tell me to watch this movie all the time. So
Yeah,
I know I need to. I'm very behind on David Lynch actually. He's kind
yeah.
of like my biggest like cinema
Blind
blind
spot.
spot. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I try and get into more of his films. I tried watching Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, the movie, earlier this week. I just couldn't do it. It was just a little too weird for me. But no, definitely check out Mulholland Drive, because if you love horror films and if you were, raving about Starry Eyes, I think that you would find some really great appreciation in Mulholland Drive, because for me it really blends, not blends necessarily, but it's got this surreal type of nature to it, but it's also got like this really great psychological horror, and it's honestly a really mesmerizing and terrifying experience. And I would love to see what you think of it. I think you might need multiple watches, or it could be one of those movies where you watch it and then as soon as you're done, you want to rewatch it. So I'd definitely be curious as to what you'll think, because that scene in there is honestly, God, it's so terrifying, man, so terrifying. But yeah, definitely check that out when you can, man. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
So we kind of already mentioned this earlier, but what are we seeing at the movies this week? If you're not going to the movies, what are you going to try and watch towards the end of the week?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm seeing A Quiet Place on Wednesday,
Wednesday,
tomorrow.
lucky.
And then my theater just got Isle of Dogs, so I'm gonna try and check
Oh,
that out this week,
nice.
most likely. So probably just those two will probably be the only ones I get a chance to because I work doubles all week this week, so
Oh,
that's no
yikes.
fun. But yeah, so definitely gonna be so super excited for A Quiet Place. Like really, really excited for it. But Isle of Dogs will be a fun one as well.
Yeah, I have to wait one more week, I think, for Isle of Dogs because it's expanding to over 1,500 theaters next week. So hopefully it'll finally make it to me because I'm not gonna drive to Phoenix to go see that when I have a theater that's 4 minutes away.
Yeah.
So A Quiet Place though on Thursday. My dad got the day off too because he's excited to see it. And I think a lot of people don't realize just how big this movie is going to do at the box office. The marketing has been amazing. The 100% on Rotten Tomatoes still stands, and there's just been rave reviews left and right, man. And even their marketing campaign has like the STFU thing,
Oh,
and
I
this
thought
is
that was so great.
it's so not only is it super genius, but honestly, it's got me thinking like, because I heard or read a tweet that someone said that someone was like talking throughout the film, and apparently it's supposed to be like almost like a silent film
Yeah,
outside
no,
of like a couple
apparently
big moments.
apparently most of it is like silent. Like it's been like one of those movies I've been like trying to like keep my expectations down for it like as much as
Yeah,
possible so I don't like overhype myself. But like
yeah.
if this thing is as good as it seems it is, yeah, definitely
Yeah,
excited.
exactly, and that's the thing is I've never had a bad movie going experience, and one of the reasons I try and refrain from seeing horror movies at the theaters is because the audience members for horror films are just the worst. I mean, there's good ones like us, and there's good ones like a lot of my family members and a lot of my friends, but a lot of the stories I've heard has just turned me off from even seeing them in theaters and just waiting for home video. And if anyone ruins A Quiet Place for me, man, I'm going to flip out, man, because it really seems like one of those movies where you really just lack of sound is just going to immerse you in each frame, and the sound of bushes rustling, wind blowing I'm sure is what we're going to get. But I am so excited to just really get my eyes and ears onto this beast. I'm sure it's going to be a beast. I'm really excited for it, and I can't wait. I haven't been this excited for a horror film since ever. So yeah, definitely can't wait to check that out on Thursday. I'm seeing Unsane tonight too.
I still
Steven
haven't seen that
Soderbergh.
one, but I want
Yeah,
to go check that one out too.
yeah, it's supposed to be like a psychological thriller, right in my wheelhouse. And Steven Soderbergh is one of the most underrated directors I've ever seen,
He shot it on iPhones.
and shot it on an iPhone. So hopefully I end up liking that because I've heard some good things, I've heard some great things, and I've heard some okay things. So I'm pretty excited to check that out tonight at 5 o'clock. Last thing before we head out. What is one movie that you watched recently for the first time or a rewatch that you want to talk about, or maybe something you want to praise, rave about, rant about that is movie related? It can be anything regarding the industry, news stories that we didn't talk about today or I didn't talk about last week. Just anything that you want to talk about that is movie related, you can reserve this time to do so.
Um. So either do I want to talk a movie? I'd say, okay, I'll say, I'll just give one more recommendation.
Okay.
I was a little bit late to it, but I finally checked out The Ritual like a week or so ago, about 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago, and I was really impressed with it. The Ritual is a really, really good movie. I felt like I was watching what the most recent Blair Witch was supposed to be, but then like
Yeah, I
didn't
heard you
end
say
up
that.
being.
Yeah.
The Ritual, it's really great. It's like it's kind of it's part guys lost in the woods horror movie, which is kind of like it's kind of a cliche horror subgenre, and not a lot to do with it. But then once it gets more into the psychological aspects, and then it has we were talking about earlier. You enjoy good creature design.
Yeah.
Definitely check out The Ritual. I don't want to spoil it, but the monster in this thing is super fucking cool. So
Yeah.
and but it's shot really well. It's based off of a very popular horror book. But The Ritual has some really good performances in it. It has some really good horror elements to it. It's a very, very slow build, but then once this third act hits, like things go
Shit hits the
bananas,
fan.
and it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a very layered horror movie, like I said, like because it has these metaphors about dealing with grief. And I like I said, I really love whenever horror movies can like kind of take something a very personal aspect of life, and like, that's always the best horror movies to me, when you take like, everyday feelings or everyday situations, and then you just kind of surround it with, horror tropes, and like insert it into the world of horror, because then you kind of have a lot more to play with as far as your storytelling goes. So I think The Ritual is a really, really great movie, so definitely watch that on Netflix.
Yeah, my best friend has been talking about that film since he saw it when it came out, I think in February on Netflix, and he said it was a really great film that I should watch. And I was going to try and get around to it, but I just keep putting it off. But I think now that since I'm kind of in a horror movie kick with Unsane and A Quiet Place, maybe I can fit that in tomorrow. If I get the chance, because I've heard nothing but great things, and it sounds like a horror movie that would be right in my wheelhouse. So there's not really too much that I really want to talk about. Again, it's early in the week, so there's not much movie news that we missed or anything. I did watch Akira, anime film from 1988. Was super excited for it. Was pretty let down. I understood its themes, but its visual imagery sort of felt like just too much. Just wasn't for me. I've made this known before that I really appreciate the animation in anime films specifically, because it's so incredible. I cannot stress enough how good it is. Probably the best animation I may have ever seen, specifically in Akira. And it just, anime films to me, they have so much going on within its narrative and its plot that it collapses under its own weight. And it's just really upsetting, because I was super excited. In the first 25 minutes of that film, I thought it was going to be the best film I've ever seen, because I thought it was going to be my favorite movie ever, and then it sort of just evolves into this batshit crazy science fiction film. It just wasn't, just wasn't.
I don't love it like people do, but I do really appreciate Akira for sure, but like, I don't love it per se, but
yeah. Yeah, just a weird one, man. I was a little bummed out. I'll have to give it another go in the future, because the response I had to this is the same response I had to the original Blade Runner, and now everyone knows where I stand with that. So where can we be found on social media? What content are we creating? Go ahead and plug all your spaces. I know that you're best friends with like Alicia Malone. So where can we find you, Devaughn?
Yeah, no, me and Alicia, we're pretty cool. I have her number. No big deal or nothing. You can find me on Twitter most of the time, where I'm just oversharing, but mainly movie things. At Jesus12, it's where I post anything that I'm working on. I have a YouTube channel, Jesus12 as well, that has vlogs and like some editorial stuff, and I got some short films coming up on there pretty soon. So
nice.
Excited about that. Working on some short films and some screenplays and things like that. And then I also write for a horror website. If you want to just get all kinds of creepiness, I write for Nightmare on Film Street. It's a podcast, but then it's also a website where we review all the new horror movies coming out, trailers, news, all that good stuff. So definitely check out some of my articles on that. I recently wrote a reflection article on Blade 2 that I was pretty happy about.
Nice.
A really good one. So yeah, definitely check me out, and then check out my website, deezus.org. It's got pretty much anything that I do. It's a podcast, got all my articles, all that kind of jazz. So yeah, just check out some of my stuff and let me know what you think, but hit me up on Twitter.
Nice. Awesome, man. Yeah, you are always creating content. And I was talking to Matthew last week on the podcast before we started chatting for the episode, and he was just telling me that he talked to Jonathan, and when you and Jonathan had that event in Chicago, the Facebook event, I had heard that you're apparently one of the hardest workers that Jonathan's ever met. And just keep...
I mean, that's high praise coming from him. We do know this, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, so just keep doing you, man. You're always creating great content, and you're always a real good person to chat with. So thanks for being on, of course. Really appreciate you taking the time, because I know you just podcasted recently with Matthew. Excited to finally listen to that episode. And then you guys know where you can find me. I've mentioned it a couple times now. You can find me on Roman's Movie Reviews on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram, Letterboxd, Roman RBC. And then you can find my YouTube channel on as well, Roman's Movie Reviews. I'm working on my Blade Runner 2049 editorial right now, and I'll be working on it after I finish editing together this episode. So be on the lookout for that. Also, Big news, was just going to wait until next week's episode to just mention it, but I'm officially rebranding Roman's Movie Reviews podcast to Showtime with Roman podcast. So that's what it's going to be. I just feel like it clicks a little bit better, and it kind of flows a little bit better off the tongue. So Showtime with Roman is going to be the podcast name.